Hey y'all, welcome and welcome back to my channel and welcome to today's video. I am so excited to recommend you guys some of my favorite audiobooks of all time. I am a huge audiobook reader. I love them. I feel like there's so many times in my life where I'm doing something and I want to be reading, but I can't physically pick up a book, whether that's doing chores, driving, going on a walk. I love having audiobooks to listen to during those times. They are my favorite way to get more reading in. And I think there are also so many times where I don't think I would have enjoyed a book as much reading it physically because the audiobook narration is just so well done that it really brings the story to life. I feel like that's definitely the case for all the books I'm going to recommend you guys today. So with that, let's hop right into the video. Before we get into the actual book recs, I wanted to talk about where I listen to my audiobooks. I feel like when I was trying to get into them, I had no clue where to start. I didn't know where people were going to listen to audiobooks. So the first two ways I listen to them are through two different apps. All you need to use them is a library card and you can start listening to audiobooks through your library. The first one that I use probably the most is Hoopla. Hoopla has so many audiobooks readily available just to go ahead and borrow. They have a huge selection, tons of new releases, and lots of popular books as well. The only thing with Hoopla is I think there is a monthly limit on how many books you can borrow. I know for me it's 7 books. I don't know if that varies library to library, but for me I can borrow 7 books a month. The other app that I use is Libby. Libby does have a lot of audiobooks that are ready to go ahead and borrow and listen, but for the most part I would say it works more like the traditional library where you put in a hold. A lot of books, if they're more popular, there is a wait time, and then when they're available you can borrow them of course and listen to them for a set duration and then return it back to your library. Libby, I would say, while they don't have as many audiobooks ready to listen to right away, I feel like they do have more of a selection. There just is a wait time if there's like a more popular audiobook that you're wanting to place a hold for. But I love both of those apps. I use them both every single day. The third app that I use is Audible, which you do have to pay for. I have like a monthly plan where I get 1 credit a month, which you use your credits for audiobooks. So you can pretty much buy any audiobook you want and then it is yours to keep and download forever. So all 3 of those apps I absolutely love and would recommend to listen to audiobooks. So with that, let's hop right into the book recommendations. First, I have some nonfiction to recommend you guys. I love nonfiction on audio, especially if it is narrated by the author, which is the case for the 3 I have to recommend you guys. The first one is The Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green. I was such a John Green girly growing up in middle school. I feel like his books were really there during a lot of my formative years, so I look back fondly on a lot of those books and him as an author. In The Anthropocene Reviewed, the concept for the book started out as a podcast, which makes it translate really well into audiobook format. And as I mentioned, it is narrated by John Green himself, which added that dose of nostalgia that I just loved. Basically, in this book, John Green is reviewing a bunch of different topics, everything from like Diet Dr. Pepper to the game of Monopoly to the penguins of Madagascar. It is just kind of random, but it's so fun and it kept my attention the whole time. He has all these little anecdotes that kind of relate back to his life and just different commentary on different topics, and I felt like there were so many good life lessons in here and I loved learning more about John Green. So highly recommend The Anthropocene Reviewed on audio. The next audiobook I want to recommend is Beyond the Wand by Tom Felton. This is his memoir, and if you're a Harry Potter fan, you have to read this. Even if you're not, I thought it was so interesting to learn more about Tom Felton and about his life and just kind of a behind the scenes look at being an actor in the acting industry. You definitely get a lot of behind the scenes about Harry Potter as well, which I loved learning about. I kind of thought I knew all there was to know about Tom Felton. There were so many things in his life that I had no clue he was struggling with or was going on, so it was very, very interesting to learn about. I just loved it so much, and again, as a Harry Potter fan, I felt that dose of nostalgia when reading this. He did an incredible narration, so highly recommend. And then the last nonfiction audiobook I have to recommend, it is a very popular one, but if you've not yet read it, I would recommend listening to it on audio. That is I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy. This one was super popular when it first came out, and for good reason. I just heard rave reviews of it, but I wasn't sure if I would connect with it. It has a lot of trigger warnings. Jeanette McCurdy was a child star. She is most well known for being on iCarly, and in her memoir she talks a lot about her relationship with her mother and the abuse she endured, and a lot about her time at Nickelodeon. You really get a raw look at the things she had to go through, but I feel like if you watch Nickelodeon Nickelodeon growing up, this is definitely a good one to listen to kind of get that behind the scenes. I was shocked. It was very eye-opening kind of seeing what really was going on. I never would have guessed that Jeanette was going through the things that she was going through, and her narration is just incredible. She has the best delivery. You can really hear the emotion in her voice as she's telling her story. Definitely a hard listen, so make sure you're in the right mindset before going in, but I feel like it was just so emotional and so heartfelt that I really connected a lot with Jeanette and her story. Next, I have a couple literary fiction audiobooks to recommend you guys. The first one is Tom Lake by Ann Patchett. The audiobook is narrated by Meryl Streep, and she does a fantastic job narrating it, as you can imagine, because she's such a wonderful actress. But in this one, we're following our main character, Laura, and she is recounting the story to her 3 daughters of her time growing up when she was an actress and she dated this fellow actor who went on to become a very big movie star. And it was just so encapsulating to listen to Meryl Streep tell the story. It really felt like she's telling the story of her life growing up and becoming an actress. I just really connected with this one, and it's one that I definitely don't think I would have liked as much had I just read it physically. The narration very much brought this story to life and made me feel connected and really in it with these characters. It's definitely not one I would have gravitated towards or wanted to really pick up on my own had I not heard such rave reviews for the audiobook because of Meryl Streep's narration, so highly recommend it as well for that reason. Another lit fic I want to recommend is Remarkably Bright Creatures by Shelby Van Pelt. This one follows our main character, Tova, who is an older woman who lost her husband. She also lost her son in a boating accident a few years back. So now in her older age, she has a job as the cleaning lady at this aquarium. It takes place in the Pacific Northwest. I feel like this is a good one to read during the summertime or just when you're in the mood for something cozy and comforting. This book is also kind of magical realism because we get the perspective of this octopus in the aquarium where Tova works. She kind of has this bond with the octopus that is so sweet and endearing to read about. There's also a little bit of a mystery element to the book because we get a third perspective, so we're kind of trying to see if all of these storylines are going to come together and how they might be connected. And again, it was just so sweet, so charming. This book feels like a warm hug, and even though it feels like a very summery type setting, the coziness of it I feel like could be perfect for this time of year as well. So if you're needing a wholesome escape, highly recommend this one. The audiobook was so well narrated. Next, I do have one YA romance to recommend you guys on audio. While romance is my favorite genre and definitely the genre I read the most, I prefer to read it physically just because I feel like the narration can kind of be a bit cheesy sometimes, especially if it's a spicy book. It kind of cringes me out, and a lot of times I feel like the narrators don't fit how I imagine the characters, so it just kind of throws me. So usually I avoid romance books on audio, but this romance trilogy I would highly recommend. It was so well done on audiobook, and that is the To All the Boys I've Loved Before trilogy by Jenny Han. In this trilogy, we're following our main character, Lara Jean, and whenever she's had a crush on a boy, she has written them a letter, not to give to them, but to kind of keep for herself as a diary entry to kind of close the chapter when she's ready to move on and put a pin in her feelings for these boys. But one day, somehow, all the letters she's ever written get mailed out to the boys that she's written them to. And the whole trilogy from there kind of follows the aftermath of these letters being sent. There's kind of a few love interests in the book, and we don't really know what's gonna happen in Lara Jean's life. It's very much a coming of age story as well. I just truly fell in love with Lara Jean. She is one of my favorite main characters ever. She is just so relatable. Even though it is YA, it definitely brought back a lot of memories from high school and from growing up. I love seeing both the romantic relationships in here play out as well as the familiar relationships. It just felt so sweet and so endearing, so highly recommend this trilogy. It was so well narrated on audiobook. And then the biggest genre category I have to recommend you guys are thrillers. Thrillers are by far my favorite to listen to on audio because they just keep my interest, they keep my attention. I don't have to pay attention super hard, like I don't have to use all my brain power, but they are interesting enough to where I can just listen and enjoy my time, and I don't have to like go back, rewind, and that is why they are my favorite. It also just feels like someone's telling you a scary story or someone's giving you the gossip, and I love that. It's my favorite. So I want to start out with some thrillers that are on the lighter side. I would say they're more like suspenseful literary fiction, so if you're not into super dark, heavy, spooky, super scary thrillers, these would be a good intro or a good place to start. The first one I want to recommend is Yellowface Race by R.F. Kuang. I say thriller very, very lightly on this one. That's why I'm starting with this one, because I think technically it is classified as literary fiction. At the start of the book, we're following our main character, June, and she's hanging out with one of her good friends named Athena, who is a fellow writer. And Athena tragically kind of has this freak accident and ends up dying. And June ends up kind of stealing one of Athena's manuscripts that Athena had told her about she was working on for her next novel. June takes this, steals it as her own published work, and it goes on to be extremely successful. The big issue with this, aside from her plagiarizing and stealing her dead friend's work, is that Athena was Chinese, June is a white woman, and this book follows Chinese slave laborers. So there is a lot of commentary in here on who can tell what stories and representation. It definitely is a very thematically driven book and a very character driven book, but I just had the best time with it. I did not necessarily think I would absolutely love this one, but it kept my attention. I was on the edge of my seat the entire time. I loved the audiobook. It was so interesting. Never knew where the story was going, and things just kept happening and the plot kept twisting and turning, and it was just the wildest ride, but the best time. Highly recommend listening to this one. Next, it would not be an audiobook recommendations video without mentioning my favorite author to listen to on audio, which kind of got me into audiobooks, and that is Sally Hepworth. She is Australian. I talk about this all the time, and she kind of writes this subgenre of like Australian thrillers, and again, I say thriller lightly. It's really more like suspenseful literary fiction, so not anything super heavy, although some darker elements are touched on, and there's definitely like murder in her books, and there's a whodunit kind of aspect, but I just absolutely love her books on audio because the accents just pull you in and to me really bring the story to life. So I will not shut up about her books, especially her audiobooks. I think they're so well done, and if you enjoy one, they're all narrated by the same narrators, so I think you will enjoy all of them. I could spend the whole video talking about each and every one of her books, but I'm going to recommend my two favorites. My very favorite is The Good Sister. This one follows two sisters, Fern and Rose, and we get their backstories. We kind of see that in the past, Rose has always stood up for her sister Fern. It's kind of taken the blame for Fern, and so in the present, Fern wants to repay Rose for all the years of kindness and all the things that she's done to help her out. So Rose is trying to have a baby, but she's unable to get pregnant. So Fern decides that she is going to be the one to have a baby for Rose. That's all I'm gonna say about that one. There's definitely a lot more to it that you uncover, a lot of suspense. Definitely some of my favorite characters of all time in this book. I really enjoyed following them. There's always a comedic aspect to Sally Hepworth's books as well. I love the Australian sense of humor. It is just so comical to me, so could not recommend that one enough. And I also want to recommend The Mother-in-Law by Sally Hepworth. I never want to give too much away when I'm talking about her books, especially this one, because I went in knowing very little, but basically we're following our main character Lucy and her relationship with her mother-in-law Diana, and we get both characters' perspectives. It's told from two different audiobook narrators, which really adds to it, and we get past and present timelines. I know I'm not giving you much, but I don't want to give anything away. And again, I went into that one kind of blind, so I recommend you do the same as well. Could not recommend that one enough. It is so good on audio. In a very similar vein, I want to recommend some of Liane Moriarty's books. Again, she is Australian, and she kind of has that suspenseful subgenre of Australian literary fiction / thrillers. Her most popular book that I recommend on audio that I actually read for the first time this year, and it's one of my favorite books now. It's one of my very few 5-star reads of the year, Big Little Lies. I'm sure you've heard of this one, if not read it yourself, because the show is very popular as well. But in Big Little Lies, we are following 3 women as our main characters, and we get all of their perspectives. We follow Jane, Celeste, and Madeline. They are all very different from one another. They have different backgrounds, have very different family dynamics, but each of them has a child that attends the same school. So that's kind of how they're all connected and how their lives intersect. And the whole story is kind of leading up to something that happened at this fundraiser night at the school. It's alluding to very dark things happening. We don't know what, so that's kind of the big climax and reveal of the book, is what happened at this fundraiser night. This one was just incredible. We get a different narrator for each woman's perspective. I was so invested in all of the characters, and just being inside their heads and seeing their thoughts and what they were going through was just so fascinating to read about, in addition to the mystery element of the story. The reveal I was so shook by, could never have predicted it. I thought it was incredibly well done. And Liane Moriarty also hits on some really heavy, tough topics in here, but it's done in a way that is so palatable and kind of made me see things from a new perspective, which I really appreciated. So could not recommend that one enough, especially on audio. And the other Liane Moriarty book I want to recommend, again, I could recommend literally all of her books on audio because they're all great, but this one is her most recent release. It came out in September, so I just read it, and that is Here One Moment. And in this book, we're following this group of people all sitting on this plane. The plane is delayed, so it's just like sitting on the tarmac for hours, and all of a sudden this woman stands up, walks through the entire plane, and this woman gives every single person on the plane a prediction of the age they're going to die and how they're going to die. And from there, we follow the perspective of this woman who gives the predictions. We see her backstory, as well as people on this plane who were given predictions, and we kind of get to see if they play out or not, if they end up coming true, how the predictions kind of affect their lives after that. And it was just so very interesting. It had, again, lots of life lessons woven in really well without feeling like it was being shoved down my throat. It was just very well done. It was very subtle, but I highly enjoyed it, and it was so entertaining. Definitely one where the mystery element is going to keep you on the edge of your seat, but the characters are so interesting as well. The next audiobook I want to recommend is One of Us is Dead by Geneva Rose. This one follows this kind of catty group of women who live in this very affluent part of Atlanta. They are very bougie, very privileged, and a whole lot of out of touch, and they all frequent the same hairstylist, and there is a murder involved, so we get the perspectives of all the women in this friend group, as well as the perspective of the hairstylist, who kind of gets all the tea from these women when they're at their appointments. This one, again, is one that I put in the thriller category, but I say thriller very lightly. It's more just like suspense. There's definitely that comedic relief aspect. Our main character, Olivia, is very much like a Regina George type of character. Very catty, mean girls, but so much fun. I loved getting all the drama and the gossip, and this was one where I enjoyed the characters so much, even though they're so unlikable, that I didn't even care too much about the mystery element of the book because I was just having a fun time. They're like so out of touch that it was just like hilarious to listen to what they had to say, and each woman in the group is narrated by a different narrator, which made it even more fun and easy to distinguish them all from one another, and it very much gave them each their own personality, and it really brought the story to life. So highly recommend. Next, I want to recommend None of This Is True by Lisa Jewell. This one follows these two women, and they end up meeting one night when they're both in the same pub celebrating their birthdays, and they kind of start bonding because they're like, oh my gosh, we were born on the same day in the same hospital. One of the women is this well-known podcaster, and the other woman kind of approaches her and is like, hey, you usually feature women on your podcast who are very successful and you tell their success stories. I am not successful yet, but I'm trying to make some big changes in my life. I think it would be very interesting if you documented my progress for your podcast. And that's all you need to know going in. It is so interesting and so well done on audio because there is a mixed media aspect to the book. We have like the podcast element, we have the podcast being turned into this Netflix series. So there's all kind of like sound effects, and the voice actors do such a great job in this one. It was so thrilling, so many twists and turns. Could not have guessed where it was going. This is another one of my favorite reads of the year, one of my very few 5-star reads, so could not recommend it enough. The next book I want to recommend, I will not shut up about again, but for good reason. That is The Kind Worth Killing by Peter Swanson. In this book, we follow our two main characters, Ted and Lily, and they end up meeting one day in this airport bar in London. They're both on the same flight back home to Boston, and they come to find out that they live in the same area, so the more they're drinking at this airport bar, the more they start telling each other things about their lives and spilling their secrets. And Ted ends up revealing to Lily that he thinks his wife is having an affair, so he makes this offhand remark that because of this he wants to kill his wife, and Lily is like, yeah, you should do that and I will help you do it. And it follows things from there. Again, I don't want to give away anything because I did not predict where this book was going at all, but it is so well done on audio. There are two different narrators. We get a female voice actor for Lily and then a male voice actor for Ted, and it flips back and forth both between their POVs as well as past and and present timelines. Each chapter in this book ends off on a cliffhanger, and you are just dying to go back into the other person's perspective to finish out the story and see where things are gonna go. And then the same thing happens when you get into the other person's chapter, and it is just a back and forth of it ending on cliffhangers and you being on the edge of your seat. It is such a twisty ride, and I love this one. It's one of my 5-star reads. Could not recommend it enough, especially on audio, because the audiobook is so well done and kept my interest the whole time, and I was so engrossed. And the last thriller I want to recommend on audio is Never Lie by Frida McFadden. I'm not the biggest Frida McFadden fan. I tend to not really like a lot of her books, but this one really did work for me. In Never Lie, we are following this recently married couple, and they are looking to buy a house. So they end up going and driving out to this home in the middle of this crazy snowstorm. When they get there, the real estate agent is not there yet, so they don't want to get trapped in their car because the snow is really coming down and it is cold out there. So they end up going inside. The house is unlocked, and they just take a look around for themselves while they wait for the realtor to get in touch with them. They soon discover that the house they're looking at to potentially buy used to belong to this kind of infamous psychiatrist who ended up going missing. And then we also get the perspective of the psychiatrist kind of leading up to her disappearance, and we're finding out what happened. This one I just thought was so interesting to listen to on audio. It was just a very easy listen that I didn't have to think too hard about. It was just a really interesting story. It was one that I was constantly having all these predictions and all these guesses and really playing detective the whole time, which I love. It kept me really engaged in the story. Lots of twists and turns in this book that I did not predict, and this is one that I think is great to listen to during the winter because it takes place during this snowstorm, and it felt very atmospheric and a little bit claustrophobic, which I love in my thrillers. So that is going to conclude this recommendations video. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, if you got a good recommendation, be sure to give this video a thumbs up. Leave me a comment below and let me know what audiobook you're going to read after watching this video, or if you have any recommendations for me, please let me know. I am always listening to audiobooks. I have one on the go at all times, so I'm sure at some point as I accumulate new favorites there will be a part 2 to this video. So thank you again so much for watching. If you're not already subscribed to my channel, be sure to hit the red button to stick around so you don't miss out on any of my future book videos, and I will see you guys so soon in the next one. Bye guys.